Good afternoon, everybody. This is Justin Horning. I'm the English Language Arts Curriculum Coordinator for the district. We're going to go ahead and get started. You should not have your microphone on, but you should be able to hear me now. If you do have any technical difficulties throughout the presentation, feel free to put your thoughts in the chat box and we'll try to figure out what's going on. I will post the recording of this presentation on the LMS after we're done, as well as any resources that you might need afterwards. So you can check back for the recording and any additional resources on the LMS. If you haven't already, go to joinpd.com and type in the code RFHGC. I'm going to start the class, but the code will be in the top right-hand corner throughout the presentation in case you still need to log in. There probably will be quite a few schools who are joining or listening later on because they have so many teachers who are joining our meeting downtown later this evening. The title of our presentation is One Size Doesn't Fit All, and what we're looking at is how can we use a Tier 1 curriculum to meet the needs of all of our students? How do those ideas work together? Our driving question that I'd like you to think about is how can we design learning experiences that address students' strengths, interests, and needs and invite student voice and autonomy? How can we do that within a Tier 1 curriculum that's written by our teachers, for all students? How can we personalize instruction, meet everybody's needs, while also using common resources? That's kind of what I want you to think about as we go throughout our time together today. Our outcome is that we will analyze examples of differentiation and scaffolding so that we can plan and implement instructional strategies that maximize the achievement of all students within the Tier 1 ELA curriculum. And then you'll be successful at the end of our time together when you can define and provide examples of differentiation and scaffolding for all learners through the lens of pedagogical practices embedded within the core curriculum. Before we get into scaffolding and differentiation specifically, I wanted to clarify what we mean by Tier 1 instruction. This is the 3-tier instructional model that the Indiana Department of Education has published. And what we're referring to is this bottom layer of Tier 1 instruction that is for all students so that all students receive grade level instruction. That's why we've spent so much time developing our curriculum, is so that we have a solid foundation for all students. This is designed for all learners and meets the needs of 80 to 90% of all students. So again, going back to our question, how can we design learning experiences that address students' strengths, interests, and needs and invite student voice and autonomy when we are using a common curriculum that's high quality and equitable for all students? Now there's also Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction, which I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but that is in addition to what students receive in Tier 1 instruction. Some students receive instruction that supports Tier 1, and few students receive specialized instruction. As we go throughout the tiers, we are increasing the support in duration and intensity. So it's more targeted for students. It might go from a small group of students to an individual student, and it also might increase in time, the amount of time that we give that support, from a couple of weeks to an entire semester, or maybe even an entire year, depending on the student. So that's the 3-tier instructional model that we're referring to when we talk about Tier 1 instruction. It's for all students. If you have Pear Deck on your screen, you can click on this image to the right to open it up so we can look at a larger image. And I'm going to walk you through what this visual is all about. And while you're clicking on it and opening it up, I wanted to mention this piece about the RISE rubric. This is kind of another piece of the why behind why we're talking about scaffolding and differentiation. All of these components of the RISE rubric have something to do with scaffolding and differentiation. So teachers are expected to know what these are and how to use them in their daily lessons. So it's helpful to have a common understanding and know how to use these within the core curriculum. Hopefully you've had some time now to click on this image and open it up. This is in the FWCS literacy framework. It's also in all of the other content frameworks as well. I'm going to start at the bottom and then work up to the top to explain it. So we always start with the students in mind, and that's this bottom piece. Differentiation is based on student readiness, interest, and learning style. We have to know where our students are academically, how close they are to mastering those standards. We have to know how much background knowledge they have about topics. We have to know the skills that they already possess before we design the differentiated learning experiences. We should also know about the student interests. What are they interested in? What are they curious about? What are they engaged in class? And then what are their learning styles? How do they best learn? Not everybody learns the same way, and we know that, but not everybody needs to be boxed into just one learning style as well. So some students might learn in a certain way with some content and different in another way. So we have to keep those things in mind. It's all about knowing our students and then going through the differentiation process. Going up this diagram, there are three basic ways of differentiating instruction. The first one over here in the green is differentiated process. That's how students arrive at their learning destination. And that could be something as simple as providing additional time for a student who needs more time to dive into the content or the skills, who might lack that background knowledge or prior skills. But it could also work the other way, where we provide more time for a high ability student, for example, to do independent research on a project or something that we started in class that they want to now take more time to learn about. So differentiated process can work for all types of students. Really, all of these can work for all types of students. The differentiated product is what that learning destination looks like. So what does that end product look like? We can use a lot of different technology to differentiate products. Could be a YouTube video or a podcast or a Flipgrid video or writing in different formats. There are lots of ways that we can make the end product look different as long as we are keeping that same overall learning outcome. And then the third way is differentiated content. So that's the resources that are used to arrive at the learning destination. And that could be something as simple as providing different articles, nonfiction articles that students can choose from, or even that are assigned to different students that are then used to achieve the same learning outcome. Another example is lit circles and letting students choose their books that they are reading in their lit circles. So those are different ways to differentiate. And then we have the next part of this diagram is the scaffolding arrows. Scaffolding is really just any additional support that the teacher provides to the students as they are working towards those grade level outcomes. So it's breaking apart the learning process into smaller steps and identifying where the gaps are. And this might be one of the most important pieces, this outcome. We are not changing the outcome in any part of this situation. We are always asking what students should know, understand, and be able to do based on grade level standards. So that's an overview of what this visual represents. What are the differences between scaffolding and differentiation, as well as how they work together. Before I give you some processing time, I'm going to go back to the Pear Deck slides. And this slide has definitions on it. I'm not going to read them all to you, but it's there for you as a reference if you want to go back into these slides to have a more concrete definition of what these are. I did want to highlight this bottom point down here, that because scaffolding and differentiation techniques are used to achieve similar instructional goals, it's all about moving students from where they are to where we need them to be. The two approaches may be blended together in some classes to the point of being indistinguishable. So we're pulling them apart to analyze them and understand them, but it's really about using them together to meet the distinct needs of our students. Okay, time for you to process. I have some pictures on the screen now, and I'd like for you to type in Pear Deck the answer to this question. How do these two images represent the differences between scaffolding and differentiation? I'll give you a couple of minutes to think and type, and then I'll share some of your responses. Okay, thank you for your responses. I'm going to share a couple on the screen. If you're still typing, you can continue to type. Okay, just a couple to share. These two images show the importance of helping our students reach the end goal, but understanding the fact that there are not only different ways to get there, the process, but also different ways to show how to get there, content. This comes to play with the 3 different ways of differentiation. Another response says the map shows that the differentiation of the material, the bridge is the scaffolding. With differentiation, we may take different routes to get to the same end place. Scaffolding builds on our prior knowledge and experiences, what we need to know to bridge the gap of understanding. And then another response, the map represents differentiation because it shows you the end goal and lets you determine how to get there. The bridge represents scaffolding because it provides assistance to a goal that would have otherwise been impossible. I really like those responses. And there were lots of other good ones too, but it sounds like for the most part, we are on the same page and you have a good understanding of what the two are. So now I'm going to give you some scenarios, and what I'd like you to do on Pear Deck is choose whether the scenario is an example of scaffolding or differentiation. The first one is the teacher allows learners to choose to listen to an audiobook or read the book. Is that an example of differentiation or scaffolding? Okay, it looks like most people have had a chance to respond. And the correct answer is differentiation. It is a differentiated process because it's how students come to understand or make sense of the content. So good job there. Next example, the teacher gives students a simplified version of a lesson, assignment, or reading, and then gradually increases the complexity, difficulty, or sophistication over time. Is that scaffolding or differentiation? You guys were pretty fast with that one. The correct answer is scaffolding. It's bridging the gap between where students are and where we want them to be. Another example, the teacher gives students an exemplar or model of an assignment that they will be asked to complete. Is that an example of scaffolding or differentiation? The correct answer is scaffolding because, again, it's bridging the gap between where students are and where we want them to be. Another example, the teacher allows students to propose their own ideas for projects. Scaffolding or differentiation? You are right on that one. Differentiated content because it is all about what resources are used to arrive at the learning destination. I have 2 more for you. The next one is the teacher uses think alouds to model his or her thought process as he or she reads a text, solves a problem, or designs a project. Is that differentiation or scaffolding? I think a few of you are holding out for me to show the answer, but that's okay. I'm going to show you anyway. The correct answer is scaffolding, because again, we're bridging the gap between where students are and where they need to be. The teacher is the one doing that. Good change. Okay, last one. The teacher describes or illustrates a concept, problem, or process in multiple ways to ensure understanding. Is that scaffolding or differentiation? Okay, looks like we have kind of a mixed bag here. The correct answer is actually scaffolding, because again, we are bridging the gap, or yeah, scaffolding, because again, we are bridging the gap between where students are and where they need to be. It's the teacher who's the one representing the ideas in multiple ways. It's not the students who are demonstrating their knowledge or understanding in multiple ways. Oh, look, you all got it right. That's amazing. Good job. Okay, thank you for, everybody gets mixed up with that one. It's kind of a trick question. But again, the point is not to say what's this or what's that. The point really is to understand how they work together to support student achievement. So thank you for participating in that. Now I'd like to add another layer to this and dig a little bit deeper by looking at how do these ideas work in reality? How can we take these ideas of differentiation and scaffolding and apply them to actual teaching? So I'd like you to click on this chart here, and it'll, so that you can open it up and save your own copy, and it'll be a larger version. I'm going to go through what's in this chart, and then I'm going to show you how it works within the collaborative inquiry cycle, and then I'm going to provide you with an example of how it works in that collaborative inquiry cycle. So this chart, this information I got from a book by Carol Ann Tomlinson, who's kind of the guru on differentiation. And so I added a couple of my own things and changed up some of the other things on the chart. But I think it does a good job of representing how we can use these things with our students. So if you look at the top, you'll see across the top is readiness, interest, and learning profile. We always start with our students and where they're at before we decide what's best for them in terms of differentiating by content, process, or product. So we have readiness, interest, and learning profile with definitions so that you can refer back to those. We have to know where our students are so that we can know how to appropriately adjust our instruction. Then on the left-hand column is the different ways of differentiating, and you can see also definitions there. And then inside the chart are specific ways that we can differentiate for our students based on their readiness, interest, and learning profile. For example, if I'm experiencing a class that is really struggling with engagement, they're not interested, they are bored out of their minds, I might look in this interest column first and then figure out if I should differentiate by content, process, or product, depending on what I'm teaching, and then choose some of these ideas to address that lack of interest. That's an example of how you could use this chart. And I'm going to give you some more time to look at this later, but for now, I'm going to go back to the slides on Pear Deck and walk you through how to use this in a collaborative inquiry cycle, where we have 4 phases: assess, design, implement, and then measure, reflect, and change. In phase 1 of assessing, we're starting here. I really wanted to emphasize the importance of starting with where our students are. Assess where students are, considering the curriculum expectations and building on student readiness, interest, and learning profile to establish learning goals and success criteria, starting with the students. Phase 2 is actually designing the learning experiences based on content, process, or product, and choosing what's appropriate for our students. Phase 3 is teaching, implementing our plan, monitoring the learnings and scaffolding as needed. So there's that scaffolding piece where we're filling in the gaps as needed, and guiding students into deeper discoveries. And then maybe the most important part of this is phase 4, where we are collaborating with our coworkers, our partner teachers, and even other teachers across the district on what works, what doesn't work, and what are some next best steps for our students. I'm going to give you a specific example of how you might apply this process. So phase 1, let's say that I have a small group of students who lack the background knowledge or readiness needed to access the grade level text about the Constitution. So I'm focused in this column of readiness because I know that my students don't have that background knowledge. Not all of them, but there is a small group of students that I'm aware of who need some additional support. So next phase is designing the learning, and I'm focusing on the content box because I feel like that's what's most appropriate for the lessons that I'm teaching on the Constitution or text related to the Constitution. So my plan is, so while other students are independently writing or reading, I'm going to facilitate a series of small group vocabulary lessons on key terms related to the Constitution. I will also highlight these terms in the grade level text. So I've chosen a couple of these, 3 of these options in this box: targeted small group instruction, front-loading vocabulary, as well as highlighted texts. So I'm using multiple strategies that's very precise because I'm focused on readiness and differentiating by content. Phase 3 is when I'm actually going to do the teaching, so implementing the design. As students demonstrate mastery of those vocabulary terms, they are removed from the small group. So once they are done with that, they've demonstrated mastery, they don't need to be in my small group forever. I'm not going to keep them in a targeted small group on vocabulary for every text that we read just because they struggled with one area. We have to recognize that their background knowledge and skills may vary depending on the content of the lesson or the text. And then phase 4, I'm going to collaborate with my colleagues and ask questions like, is additional instruction needed? And has the instruction led to comprehension of grade level texts? And then I'm going to repeat the process. Okay, once again, I've done a lot of talking, so I want to give you some processing time to look at that chart. Hopefully you opened it up in another tab or downloaded it. Please take some time now to reflect on that chart and think through specifically phases 1 and 2 of the collaborative inquiry cycle, which is focused on assessing where students are and designing learning experiences. And the question I'd like you to respond to is, how can you use this information in an upcoming lesson? I'll give you some time to look through the chart, have a think, and then respond on Pear Deck. Okay, thank you for taking time to respond to that question. I'm going to show a couple of responses as I was reading through. Actually, just two. By assessing our students before the lesson, we can be more specific in our students' learning needs. This could be as simple as a sticky note exit slip the day before. I really like that because it's just something that's simple. It doesn't have to be a whole complicated, messy process. It could be as simple as an exit slip the day before and then actually using that information the following day. Following a lesson that I did this past week, I have found that I need to reteach elements of research. I will conduct a mini workshop and supplementary materials from student examples to reteach the desired skills. That's a great example of being responsive to the needs of our students based on very specific data. This next slide, if you look back at the screens or the slides on the screen, this is just another way to represent that collaborative inquiry cycle that I was talking about, where we assess, design, implement, and then measure, reflect, and change, and then start that process over again. And what I wanted to highlight was the way that this is similar to the teaching and learning cycle that we've used in the past. So this cycle is from Dive into Deep Learning, Tools for Engagement. And the teaching and learning cycle, this slide just shows how the two are related. They do the same thing. They achieve basically the same goal. They're just different representations of a similar process. So phase one of the collaborative inquiry cycle is similar to steps 1 and 2 of the teaching and learning cycle, and then so on and so forth. And you can see that reflected in those graphics. So I just wanted to point out the similarities between the two. I kind of like the collaborative inquiry cycle's simplicity with, I know it's just one less step, but I think it's helpful. Both are helpful in different ways. This next slide is something that we are going to dive deeper into next week, or not next week, but next time we meet virtually. And this is the fusion of pedagogical and innovative practices paired with the learning design rubric from Dive into Deep Learning. So if you'd like to get a head start on some of that information, you can click there and save that to your computer if you'd like to. But what we've spent a lot of time on is on this side in the proven pedagogical practices. We've worked really hard over the past 2 years to incorporate all of those parts into the written curriculum. And so now as we go into this summer and we are writing through the lens of deep learning, how can we bring in more of these emerging innovative practices and look at how can we differentiate and scaffold more organically for our students and teachers. So that's something that we'll look at next time in some more depth. So I wanted to give you a heads up on that. The last slide that I have for you is a commitment and a digital parking lot. If you have any additional questions, comments, or concerns, this would be a great place to put those. I will definitely follow up as soon as possible, as well as question number 1, how will you use this information moving forward? I know it's a lot of information in a short period of time, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on what did this spark in you? Did it give you some ideas or some encouragement or some excitement about teaching moving forward? And then of course, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. I really appreciate your time and your effort and participation today. Again, I'll post all of these resources and the presentation on the LMS as soon as we are done. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you again.